Let's talk about bad openings to novels versus good openings to novels. How you know the difference and how do you make yours a really good one so that readers love it. You have seconds to grab your reader's attention. I mean, look how fast you scroll on TikTok or YouTube Shorts. We're constantly looking for things that will grab our attention, and our attention is very easily fractured. If the beginning of your book is not strong and doesn't just boom, grab the reader right away, you're going to lose them and they are going to close the book forever. You don't want that to happen to you. I wrote 10 books in 8 years before I sold my first one, which means I wrote a lot of really bad openings. It wasn't until I figured out how to change my openings to make them really grab the reader that I went on to sell 85 books in 24 countries and hit all of the major bestseller lists. That way that I changed the beginning of my book changed everything for the trajectory of my career, for the readers that I had, and the sales that I had. So if you want to be more successful with your sales, with your readers, with editors, with whatever writing and publishing journey you are on, then you need to take notes on these 4 key elements to a good opening to a novel. Number 1, you probably guessed, it's the cliched dark and stormy night. It's not that you can't start with the weather, it's just that the weather needs to be a character essentially in that scene, because the reader doesn't care about the weather unless the weather is having an impact on the plot or the characters. Otherwise, you're basically exchanging small talk with the reader. How's the weather where you are? Oh, it's raining. Oh, it's snowing. Whatever. The reader doesn't care. You know, a lot of us, we have those conversations in okay, we really don't care how the weather is in places that we don't live because it's not affecting us. However, if you have weather in the beginning of your book and it is affecting your character and it is affecting their ability to do what they're trying to do, the reader will care because that will add another roadblock and another conflict to what the character has to go through. And we like characters that have to struggle. We like characters that really work hard to get their goals. For a writing exercise, I'd like you to take whatever scene you have, maybe even the opening scene, and add weather to it. See how a storm or a blizzard or a raging flood or some kind of incredible heat affects your character's ability to go after what they're trying to achieve. It should definitely get in their way somehow. Otherwise, your reader's just going to ride off into the sunset and say bye-bye. Okay, that was a little bit cliched, but you get what I mean. You don't want it to be a cliche. You don't want it to be boring. You don't want your opening to be small talk. You want it to be action that the reader is immediately drawn into. Along the same lines of that is your character's history. If you've ever met a new neighbor and they go on and on and on about where they grew up, where they went to school, who their grandmother is, what their favorite ice cream is, you don't care. Right? Like you don't even know these people yet. That happened to me. I had a neighbor that I went over and introduced myself to when we first moved into the neighborhood, and I swear she talked for 20 minutes straight about her life. I was just thinking, I've got all these boxes to unpack. I got to get home. Did not have a connection with her yet to care. That's what happens in your book when you go on and on about your character's history.
I didn't kill my wife. I don't care.
Your reader doesn't care yet. They're not going to stay for the cookies and tea. They're not going to stay for anything. They're going to be like, oh, I could be watching Netflix right now. That's not what you want to have happening. So how do you turn your character's history into a good opening? You want to have just enough hooks to keep the reader coming back for more. Think of it this way. If I had gone over to the neighbor's house and she said, I can't talk right now, I've got something going on, and slams the door. Or she just is very secretive or crying or arguing with somebody. When you see those things from a distance, you're like, I wonder what's going on. What the character history is essentially is backstory. What backstory does, and I've done some videos on this, is it slows down your plot. Think of your plot like a car on a road. If your plot all of a sudden slows down or backs up, which is what backstory is, you are not going anywhere anytime fast. And the reader's thinking, I want to know what's happening with this bad guy, or I want to know what's happening with this lost child. The reader's really trying to get to that next part of the story, and you have basically slowed them down by dumping a whole lot of history in there. A good rule of thumb to follow is looking at whether this moment of history for the character has been triggered by what is happening in the plot or what another character has said. Because we don't tend to think about our histories or our past unless they're triggered by a memory that comes up or something we see that reminds us of something or somebody says something. So when you're looking at your characters, you have to think of them like humans. Would I do this right now? Would I stand here waiting outside this building and think about my history for however long 5 pages takes? You probably wouldn't. Most of us don't. So you want your character to kind of be moving along and only think about that when it is triggered by something that happens in the book. That accomplishes two purposes. It not only keeps the backstory to a minimum, but it also only puts in backstory that gets the plot moving. And I've said this before, every word in your book needs to move it forward in some way. In Riley Sager's Home Before Dark, in the first chapter with the female protagonist, there is a reference to her history, but it doesn't explain everything. It gives you just a hint of what's there. When she walks into this office, the receptionist gives the protagonist a knowing smile that the receptionist knows about the book, which is the book about her family's history. And she calls it My Family's Greatest Blessing, also our biggest curse. And then the author moves on. So that little nugget that the author put in there really makes the reader keep turning the pages to figure out why the protagonist said that. But the action is carrying the novel forward and keeping the plot moving. For your writing exercise, I want you to take a scene that you have, maybe even the opening scene, and take out 90% of the backstory. Cut it down to 1 or 2 lines that is triggered by something that happens in the book. The third kind of bad opening is one that can be done if it's done correctly. It's the distant overview. It's like the drone view of the entire plot. The drone's flying in, and here's the house, and here's the people. I've seen that done in a lot of movies, and I read that in some books. Speaking of which, a plane just went over my house. The problem with that is that it generally has to be done an omniscient point of view, which is the point of view of some kind of a god, an omniscient presence that is watching over the scene. And that creates distance between the reader and the character because it's being narrated either by the author or some being far outside the scope of the book. Think of it like this. You go over to meet your new neighbor, but a third neighbor comes out of nowhere and tells you everything about the neighbor that's standing in front of you.
My brother, the doctor.
When you're thinking, I really want to find this out on my own. What you want to do with your opening is pick a point of view, some character, whether it's the villain or one of the protagonists, and use that to filter their view of the beginning of the book. How do you know who to pick? Depends on what you want out of your book. So the reader is going to build a relationship kind of like a puppy imprinting on a new owner with the first person that they see on the page. So who do you want that person to be? I usually choose the person that has the most to lose or the most to learn in the book. For your bonus tip, I want you to look at the books that you're reading and the books that you're writing and look at the white space in the opening of the book. White space is the space between the paragraphs. And when there's a lot of it, the reader feels like they have visual breathing room. They don't feel really overwhelmed. When you have a lot of dense paragraphs, it can make the reader think, oh my God, this is so much to read. I can't stay up and do this. Remember how I talked about TikTok scrolling, right? Well, when people are scrolling, they're looking for that one little thing that will hook them in, and then they'll watch the whole video. What you've got to do with these first few pages especially is hook that reader in, because they'll be more hooked and really engaged with your character and really want to know how this book turns out. I know from when I first started out how difficult it can be to get that feedback. And I know how much I still need it, even as an author who's published all these many books, because sometimes you need an outside perspective to say, this could go this direction or that direction. So come to our Fun Friday writing sprints, and not only do you get to write, but you get to ask me questions. I'm here to teach you how to write the best possible book you can.